The verse in Exodus 33 verse 15 is not simply a historic phrase uttered by a leader in a moment of tension, it is a cry from the soul, a theological declaration, a model of absolute dependence, and an invitation to every believer to examine their own relationship with God's presence. Moses, in the midst of a national and personal crisis, does not ask for more miracles, more provisions, or more military victories. The only thing he demands, firmly and reverently, is God's presence. And that demand changes everything. Because behind those words there is no negotiation, but worship, no despair, but spiritual discernment. Moses understands something that many later generations have forgotten, that God's move without his presence is a dangerous illusion, a path that leads to a desert with no way out, to religion without revelation, to activity without divine authority. When Moses says, "If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here," he is rejecting any advancement, any progress, any blessing that is not accompanied by the tangible, real, and personal manifestation of God. They aren't interested in leaving where they are if God isn't with them. They aren't interested in conquering the promised land if Yahweh isn't walking before them. They aren't interested in fame, success, or the admiration of the people, if it means doing so without the intimate company of the Creator. This is a radical stance in a world, and in a church, that often values results more than relationships, achievements more than communion, doing more than being. Moses teaches us that true blessing is not in the destination, but in the wayfarer who walks with us. This verse arises in a deeply painful context. Israel has just committed the sin of the golden calf, Exodus 32, a massive betrayal of the covenant newly established at Sinai. God, in his justice, threatens to withdraw his presence from the camp and send an angel to guide them, Exodus 33 verses 2-3. At first glance, this seems sufficient, a powerful angel, heavenly guidance, supernatural protection. But for Moses, this is not enough. An angel is not God. A blessing is not communion. A miracle is not intimacy. Moses knows that what makes the nation of Israel unique is not its strength, its numbers, or its land, but that the eternal, holy, and glorious God walks among them. That is why he dares to say to God, "If you do not go, neither will we." It is an ultimatum of faith, not of rebellion. It is an act of spiritual wisdom, not of human stubbornness. Here Moses reveals a profound conviction, that God's presence is more valuable than God's promise. Because a promise without presence becomes an empty hope. The promised land without God's presence would be just another territory, perhaps conquered with sword and sweat, but without glory, without holiness, without eternal purpose. Moses understands that the greatest danger is not staying in the desert, but moving forward without God. Many today advance in their ministries, careers, families, and projects, but without God's presence. They have plans, strategies, resources, talents, but they lack the cloud of glory, the fire from on high, the voice that guides them in the night. And that, even if it seems successful, is spiritually a tragedy. Moses' response is also a model of intercession. He doesn't speak only for himself, but for us. Do not take us up from here. He identifies with the people, even though they have failed. He doesn't separate himself from them, he doesn't put himself above them, he doesn't seek personal privileges. His cry is collective. His longing is communal. He knows that without God's presence, the entire people will perish, even if they reach Canaan. This is an urgent lesson for spiritual leaders today. It's not about how much you can accomplish alone, but about how much God is present in the midst of your community. True leadership is not measured by followers, but by the manifestation of God's glory among the people. Furthermore, this verse reveals the nature of a mature faith. Moses is not asking God to eliminate the problems, to stop the desert, to speed up the process. He is asking God to be there, in the midst of the problem, in the midst of the desert, in the midst of the process. He doesn't want an easy route, he wants a route with God. He doesn't desire comfort, he desires divine companionship. How many of us pray for God to change our circumstances, when what we really need is for Him to manifest Himself in them? Moses doesn't ask God to take away the desert, he asks him to walk with him in the desert. And that changes everything. Because the desert with God is a place of revelation, the desert without God is a place of despair. This verse also confronts our modern notion of spiritual success. Today, we value the visible, numbers, buildings, social networks, influence, growth. But Moses reminds us that what truly matters is the invisible, presence, intimacy, communion, the glory that dwells in secret. You can have a worship service packed with people, but if God's presence isn't there, you're just making noise. You can have a ministry with global reach, but if God doesn't walk with you, you're building on sand. Moses invites us to stop, to evaluate, to ask ourselves, are we moving forward with God or just moving forward? Are we building with Him or just building? The phrase, "do not take us up from here," also implies a willingness to wait. Moses is willing to stay in the desert, a place of trial, of scarcity, of uncertainty, if it means waiting until God confirms His presence. What a contrast to our generation of haste, immediacy, and quick results. We want to leave now, advance now, conquer now, but Moses teaches us that it is better to remain in the difficult place with God than to go to the promised place without Him. There is a time to stop, to not move, to not make decisions, until the cloud moves. Until the voice says, "I am going with you." Patience is not passivity, it is faithfulness. And Moses is faithful even in his waiting. This verse also reveals Moses' confidence in God's character. He is not afraid to speak frankly, boldly, and intimately. He does not speak to a distant idol, but to a personal God who listens, who responds, who is moved. Moses knows he can negotiate with God, not because God is manipulable, but because God is relational. Yahweh is not offended by the honesty of a broken heart, He delights in it. Moses does not use religious formulas, he uses the language of the soul. And God responds, "I will do what you have said, for I have found favor in your sight, and I know you by name." Exodus 33 verse 17. God's presence is not obtained by merit, but by grace, not by effort, but by relationship. Moses is not perfect, but he is intimate. And that is what opens the doors to glory. Applied to our lives today, this verse is a call to spiritual authenticity. Are we willing to say to God, "Without you, I cannot go one step further"? Are we willing to stop our plans, our projects, our goals if He doesn't go with us? Or do we continue forward out of inertia, out of social pressure, out of ambition, out of fear of being left behind? Moses invites us to a courageous faith that prefers fidelity over fame, communion over comfort, presence over promise. It is also a call to radical dependence. In a world that teaches us to be self-sufficient, Moses reminds us that without God we are nothing. We cannot lead, we cannot love, we cannot serve, we cannot overcome, without His constant presence. It is not about having God as a plus, as a spiritual reinforcement, but as the center, the foundation, the air we breathe. "Without me, you can do nothing," Jesus said, John 15 verse 5. Moses understood this before anyone else. That is why his life was powerful, not because of his eloquence, his preparation, or his charisma, but because he walked with God. This verse is also an antidote to empty religiosity. Many perform rituals, attend worship, read the Bible, pray, but live without awareness of God's presence. Everything becomes mechanical, superficial, and cultural. Moses breaks that pattern. For him, religion without God's presence is useless. He prefers to remain in the desert with God than to enter the promised land without Him. How many of us are living a faith of facade, of appearances, of traditions, but without fire, without anointing, without a real encounter with the Lord? Moses challenges us to return to the heart of faith, the search for presence, not blessings. Finally, this verse is a hidden promise. For when Moses asks for God's presence, God not only grants it, but reveals His glory to him like never before. Exodus 33 verses 18 to 23. When we prioritize presence, God doesn't give us crumbs, He gives us his face. He gives us intimacy. He gives us revelation. He gives us transformation. God's presence is not an ornament, it is the engine of all revival, all healing, all restoration. Where he is, there is life. Where he walks, there is victory. Where he dwells, there is holiness. Therefore, today, this verse challenges us. What are you willing to sacrifice for God's presence? Are you willing to stop? To wait? To give up your plans? To miss human opportunities? To be misunderstood? Moses did. And that's why he changed history. His spiritual courage opened the doors for God's glory to descend upon the tabernacle, for the cloud to guide them by day and fire by night, for the people to be distinguished among all nations, not by their power, but by their God. In conclusion, Exodus 33 verse 15 is not a verse to decorate walls or repeat in routine prayers. It is a verse that should stir our hearts, confront our priorities, and reorder our spiritual lives. It is a reminder that God is not interested in what we do for him, but in whether he is with us while we do it. He does not want our sacrifices, but our communion. He does not seek our achievements, but our dependence. Moses understood this, and that is why his life was a walking miracle. May we, like him, be able to say with courage, with sincerity, with unwavering faith, Lord, if your presence is not with me, I will not take another step. I prefer to stay here, in this desert, in this uncertainty, in this silence, with you, than to advance without you. Because without you, all is vanity. With you, even the desert is holy. May this prayer not only be Moses's, but ours. May this conviction not only be of the past, but of the present. May this truth not remain on paper, but transform our journey. Because in the end, the only thing that truly matters is that he is with us.